You are not led to this message by accident. Something has been happening in the spirit around your life, and heaven has been trying to get your attention before you step into another season of exhaustion, confusion, and distraction. Right now, while you are listening to these words, there is a battle taking place over your focus, your calling, and your future. The enemy does not waste attacks on people who carry nothing valuable. The pressure you have been feeling is proof that your destiny carries weight. For too long, you have been trying to survive a season that God never intended you to remain in permanently. You kept pushing through emotional exhaustion. You kept carrying invisible burdens. You kept waking up tired, even after resting, because this exhaustion was never only physical. Your soul has been crying out for alignment, while the world kept demanding performance from you. Hear this clearly. God is not merely trying to make your life comfortable. He is trying to awaken the assignment attached to your name before distraction destroys another year of your purpose. There is a reason your spirit has felt restless lately. There is a reason ordinary routines no longer satisfy you. There is a reason you feel pulled towards something greater, but cannot fully explain it to the people around you. The truth is that many people around you are satisfied with survival, but deep inside, you know you were not created just to pay bills, repeat routines, and slowly lose your fire. God planted something eternal inside you, and every time you ignore that calling, your spirit feels the weight of disobedience and delay. C.S. Lewis once said, "You can never get a cup of tea large enough or a book long enough to suit me." But deeper than that, Lewis understood that human longing itself points toward eternity. The reason nothing in this world fully satisfies you is because your soul was designed for more than temporary success. You were created for divine purpose, and this is the dangerous part. Distraction rarely appears as obvious evil. Most of the time, distraction comes disguised as busyness, noise, entertainment, pressure, endless responsibilities, and the exhausting need to prove yourself to people who were never assigned to validate you in the first place. But today, heaven is interrupting that cycle. God is calling you back into focus. God is calling you back into spiritual clarity. God is calling you back into obedience. Because the next season of your life cannot be entered with a divided mind and a distracted spirit. Something must change now, not next year, not someday, now. If you feel in your spirit that this word is speaking directly to you, comment 777 right now. And do not forget to like, subscribe, and share this message with someone who desperately needs spiritual direction in this season. Stay with me until the end, because what you are about to hear may explain why the battles in your life have become so intense recently. The pressure was never random, the warfare was never meaningless, and the isolation was never proof that God abandoned you. The exhaustion you have been feeling is deeper than physical fatigue. Sleep has not fully restored you, because your spirit has been carrying a weight your body was never designed to sustain alone. You kept telling yourself that you were simply stressed, overworked, or emotionally drained, but the truth goes far beyond that. Your soul has been reacting to a life that became overcrowded with noise, pressure, distraction, and responsibilities that were never assigned by God in the first place. There is a dangerous deception in this generation, especially in a culture obsessed with constant productivity. The world teaches you that your value comes from how busy you are, how much money you make, how many people approve of you, and how hard you can push yourself before breaking. But heaven never called you to destroy your soul in order to impress people who cannot even heal themselves. God did not create you to become a machine that endlessly performs while slowly dying internally. That heaviness you feel when you wake up in the morning is not laziness. It is not weakness. It is the warning signal of a spirit that has been stretched by battles, disappointments, silent fears, and the exhausting pressure of trying to carry tomorrow before tomorrow even arrives. You have been fighting invisible wars while still smiling in front of people. You kept functioning externally while internally asking God why you feel so disconnected, so tired, and so emotionally empty. The reason your spirit feels exhausted is because part of you has been trying to survive without complete alignment with your true assignment. Whenever a person spends years pouring energy into things that do not feed their God-given purpose, exhaustion becomes inevitable. Your soul was never designed to thrive in constant distraction. It was designed to live in clarity, obedience, discipline, and spiritual intimacy with God. Think about Martha in the Bible. She was busy serving, moving, preparing, working, and managing everything around her. Yet Jesus gently corrected her because she had become consumed by activity while neglecting the most important thing, His presence. Many believers today are living exactly like that. Busy schedules, busy minds, busy lives, but empty spirits. You can be productive and still spiritually starved at the same time. This is why some of your victories have felt strangely hollow. You achieved things you once prayed for, yet the satisfaction disappeared quickly. You kept reaching milestones only to discover that external success cannot heal internal emptiness. The soul always knows when it is disconnected from divine purpose. No amount of entertainment, money, relationships, or recognition can permanently silence that ache inside you. See, esse. Lewis once wrote, "If I find in myself desires which nothing in this world can satisfy, the only logical explanation is that I was made for another world." That longing inside you is not accidental. That restlessness is not meaningless. Your spirit is reacting to eternity. Deep inside, you know you were created for more than survival. You were created to carry purpose, truth, influence, and spiritual authority in a generation drowning in confusion. And here is what many people fail to understand. The enemy does not always attack you with obvious destruction. Sometimes he simply keeps you distracted long enough to keep you spiritually exhausted. Because exhausted people stop praying consistently. Exhausted people lose focus. Exhausted people begin doubting themselves. Exhausted people settle for comfort instead of calling. But God is exposing that cycle today. You are entering a season where your spirit must recover its strength, not through empty motivation, not through temporary hype, but through realignment with the voice of God. Because once your soul reconnects with divine purpose, clarity begins to return, strength begins to return, fire begins to return. And suddenly the things that once drained you no longer have authority over your life. That is why the battle over your focus has become so intense recently. The enemy understands that if your spirit becomes fully aligned with God's assignment, your entire life will begin to shift. And that is exactly why isolation became part of your process. The isolation you have been experiencing was never proof that God abandoned you. It was preparation. It was separation. It was a season of construction that heaven allowed, because the version of you that carries the next assignment cannot be built in constant noise and distraction. Many times, God removes people, closes doors, and silences environments because your spirit cannot hear clearly while surrounded by chaos. You thought people walked away because you were unworthy. You thought the distance, the loneliness, and the silence meant you had failed. But what if God was protecting your focus? What if heaven was pulling you away from voices that would have weakened your obedience in the season you are entering now? Some relationships were not removed to punish you. They were removed because they could not go where God is taking you. Look throughout Scripture and you will see the same pattern repeated again and again. Before Moses led a nation, he was isolated in the wilderness. Before David wore a crown, he spent years alone in the fields. Before Joseph stepped into authority, he endured betrayal and prison. Even Jesus was led into the wilderness before beginning his public ministry. Isolation has always been part of spiritual preparation. The problem is that most people interpret isolation emotionally instead of spiritually. They immediately assume rejection, failure, or abandonment. But heaven often does its deepest work in hidden places. God removes external noise so he can confront the internal battles that nobody else sees. In isolation, masks begin to fall. Distractions lose power, hidden wounds surface, pride gets exposed, fear gets confronted, and the soul finally becomes honest before God. This is why those lonely nights were not meaningless. Every moment where you felt misunderstood, every season where nobody seemed to recognize your value, every painful moment where you questioned your purpose, God was still working behind the scenes. Even when heaven felt silent, it was not absent. Silence does not mean God has stopped moving. Sometimes silence is evidence that God is building foundations too deep for public eyes to understand yet. C.S. Lewis once said, "God whispers to us in our pleasures, speaks in our conscience, but shouts in our pains." And many of you listening right now encountered God most deeply in seasons that nearly broke you emotionally, not because God enjoyed your suffering, but because pain has a way of stripping away illusions, and forcing the soul to seek what is eternal. You were never meant to become dependent on constant approval from people. That is why God allowed certain seasons where applause disappeared. He needed you to discover whether your obedience was built on public validation or genuine faith. Because if every step of your purpose depends on human encouragement, the enemy will always control your direction through fear, criticism, and rejection. Hear this clearly. Your isolation was not evidence that your life was over. It was evidence that God was recalibrating your spirit. While you were grieving lost connections, heaven was strengthening your discernment. While you were confused by closed doors, God was protecting you from paths that would have delayed your assignment. While you were crying over people who left, God was teaching you how to stand without leaning on human approval. And the truth is this: some people were attached to the version of you that God is now trying to destroy. They were comfortable with your insecurity, comfortable with your fear, comfortable with your smaller mindset. But when God begins awakening purpose inside a person, separation becomes unavoidable. Not everyone can handle the transformation that obedience produces. This is why you must stop interpreting every painful separation as rejection. Sometimes, separation is heaven, removing limitations from your future. Sometimes, isolation is where spiritual authority is born. Sometimes God hides His chosen people before revealing them publicly. Because if He exposed you too early, the weight of the assignment would crush you before your character was strong enough to carry it. And now you are beginning to understand why the battle became internal long before it became external. The real war was never only about people leaving, opportunities closing, or seasons changing. The real war was happening inside your own mind. The greatest battle in your life was never only about the people around you, the money you lacked, the opportunities you missed, or the doors that closed. The deepest war was happening inside your own mind. Long before external circumstances began attacking your life, an invisible battle had already started within your thoughts, your beliefs, and your identity. Because the enemy understands something many people never realize. If he can control your thinking, he can limit your future without ever needing to physically stop you. That is why so many chosen people live beneath their calling. Not because they lack talent, not because God abandoned them, but because fear slowly convinced them to agree with limitation. The enemy does not always destroy people through catastrophe. Sometimes he destroys them through internal surrender, through quiet hopelessness, through constant self-doubt, through the exhausting belief that nothing will ever change. You have to understand this clearly. There is a difference between fighting external battles and fighting internal agreements. External opposition can only go so far when your spirit is strong. But once your mind begins agreeing with fear, failure, insecurity, shame, and unbelief, the battle becomes far more dangerous. Because now the enemy no longer needs to attack from outside. Your own thoughts begin working against your destiny. That is why some of you kept delaying the very things God was calling you to do. You prayed for purpose, but when opportunities appeared, fear convinced you that you were not ready. You asked God for change, but when the moment came to step forward, insecurity whispered that someone else was more qualified. You carried gifts, wisdom, ideas, and spiritual insight, yet part of your mind remained trapped in old wounds and past disappointments. The real war was never just around you, it was within you. Scripture says in Romans 12:2, "Be transformed by the renewing of your mind." Notice that transformation begins internally before it ever becomes visible externally. God knows that until your thinking changes, your life will continue reproducing the same cycles. A fearful mind creates fearful decisions. A distracted mind creates unstable direction. A wounded mind sabotages healthy opportunities. This is why the battlefield of the chosen is often psychological before it becomes physical. And many people never recognize how subtle this battle truly is. The enemy rarely approaches with obvious darkness. Instead, he plants thoughts that sound reasonable. Maybe you are too late. Maybe you are not capable. Maybe your best years are behind you. Maybe you should settle. Maybe you should stop trying. These thoughts seem small at first, but over time they become strongholds that quietly imprison the soul. This is why you have felt exhausted even while doing everything you could to move forward. Part of you wanted breakthrough, while another part of you was still emotionally chained to fear. You cannot fully walk in purpose while secretly believing you are unworthy of it. Internal agreement determines external direction, and many chosen people have unknowingly spent years feeding the very thoughts that were poisoning their confidence. Think about Gideon in the Bible. Heaven called him a mighty warrior while he was hiding in fear. His environment did not define him, but his mindset still needed transformation before he could step into authority. The same thing is happening with many of you right now. God sees strength in you that you still struggle to recognize within yourself. Heaven already knows who you are becoming, but your mind is still fighting with the memory of who you used to be. And this is where the danger becomes serious. If the enemy cannot completely destroy your destiny, he will attempt to distract you, delay you, intimidate you, or mentally exhaust you until you voluntarily abandon your assignment. Hell understands that a focused believer is dangerous. A spiritually disciplined person becomes difficult to stop. That is why confusion, anxiety, comparison, and overthinking have attacked this generation so aggressively. But hear this clearly today: you are not powerless against this battle. God never called you to remain imprisoned by fear, shame, insecurity, or mental torment. The same God who called you is also capable of renewing your mind, restoring your confidence, and rebuilding your spiritual authority. But it begins with confronting the lies you have been agreeing with for years. You must stop speaking defeat over your own future. Stop rehearsing failure before obedience even begins. Stop allowing old pain to become prophecy over your next season. The enemy wants you trapped in survival mode because survival mode keeps people spiritually passive. But God is trying to awaken vision, courage, discipline, and authority inside you again. And this is where the next transformation begins. Because eventually God will bring every chosen person to a painful but necessary moment where control itself must be surrendered. One of the hardest lessons God will ever teach a chosen person is this: you cannot walk fully by faith while remaining addicted to control. Many of the battles you have faced recently were not only attacks from the outside. Some of them were divine interruptions designed to break your dependence on certainty, comfort, and self-management. Because as long as you believe you must control every outcome, every timeline, every relationship, and every detail of your future, your spirit will never fully rest in God. The truth is that your need for control was often born from fear. Fear of disappointment, fear of betrayal, fear of failure, fear of losing time, fear of not having enough. Somewhere along the journey, you learned to protect yourself by overthinking everything, planning every possible scenario, and carrying burdens that God never asked you to carry. You convinced yourself that if you stayed alert enough, prepared enough, and careful enough, you could prevent pain from entering your life again. But constant control creates constant anxiety. That is why many people look calm externally while internally they are exhausted beyond words. Their mind never stops racing. Their spirit never fully relaxes. Even during moments of rest, they remain mentally trapped in future problems that have not even happened yet. They pray to God for peace while secretly refusing to release control over the very things producing their torment. This is why God sometimes allows situations that your strength alone cannot fix. He allows moments where your plans fail, where timelines shift, where doors close unexpectedly, and where certainty disappears. Not because He abandoned you, but because He is teaching you a deeper level of trust. Faith does not grow in environments where you can control everything. Faith grows when obedience becomes greater than understanding. Look at Abraham. God called him to leave familiarity without revealing every detail of the journey ahead. Look at Peter stepping onto the water. The miracle only existed as long as he kept his eyes on Jesus instead of the storm. In both stories, control had to die before faith could fully activate. And the same principle applies to your life right now. Some of you have been asking God for breakthrough while still clinging tightly to your own version of safety. But there are seasons where heaven will intentionally remove false stability so that you stop building your identity around control instead of trust. God is not trying to weaken you. He is trying to free you from the prison of needing to understand everything before obeying Him. Hear this clearly. Delayed obedience often disguises itself as over-preparation. You keep waiting until you feel completely confident, completely secure, completely ready. But many times God calls people forward before they feel prepared. Because if you only move when every answer is visible, you are no longer walking by faith, you are walking by certainty. This generation has become addicted to certainty. People want guaranteed outcomes before they commit, guaranteed success before they begin, guaranteed comfort before they obey. But the kingdom of God has never operated that way. The greatest transformations in Scripture always required surrender before clarity. Noah built before rain appeared. Moses moved before the sea opened. Joshua marched before the walls fell. And this is exactly why your season has felt uncomfortable. God is breaking your emotional dependence on control, because the next level of your calling requires deeper trust than you have ever lived before. The old version of you needed visible reassurance for every step. But the person you are becoming must learn how to move, even when circumstances remain uncertain. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Reliance on God has to begin all over again every day, as if nothing had yet been done." That is the battle many of you are facing right now. Daily surrender, daily trust, daily obedience. Not because you are weak, but because dependence on God is built one decision at a time. And understand this carefully. Surrender is not weakness. Surrender is warfare. Every time you choose faith over fear, peace over panic, obedience over overthinking, you are breaking the authority that anxiety once held over your life. The enemy wants your mind trapped in endless cycles of fear, because fearful people hesitate, fearful people delay, fearful people remain spiritually stuck, even while praying for movement. But God is calling you higher now. He is teaching you how to trust Him beyond your emotions. He is teaching you how to obey without complete visibility. He is teaching you how to walk forward without demanding control over every outcome. Because the moment you finally release what you were never designed to carry, God begins rebuilding something far stronger inside you. What you thought was destruction was often reconstruction. God has been rebuilding you from the inside in ways that most people around you cannot even recognize yet. The painful seasons, the delays, the disappointments, the silent battles, and the emotional breaking points were not random attacks without purpose. Heaven was stripping away weak foundations so something stronger, deeper, and more unshakable could finally be established within you. Many people want public blessing without private transformation. They want influence without discipline. They want purpose without surrender. They want elevation without character. But God does not build that way. Before He trusts someone with greater responsibility, He first rebuilds their inner life. Because if your character cannot sustain the weight of your calling, success itself can destroy you. That is why hidden seasons are so important. The hidden season is where God teaches endurance when nobody is applauding you. It is where obedience becomes real without public recognition. It is where discipline is formed in silence. Most people only celebrate visible victories, but heaven values the invisible process that created them. Long before Joseph stood in authority before nations, God was shaping him in betrayal, loneliness, false accusation, and prison. Long before David wore a crown, God was teaching him faithfulness in isolation. Long before Paul preached boldly, he was broken, humbled, and transformed internally. And many of you listening right now are in that hidden rebuilding season. You keep asking God why progress feels slow, but heaven is more concerned with who you are becoming than how quickly you arrive. Some delays are actually protection. Some closed doors are actually mercy. Some painful endings are God removing what would have corrupted your next season. The rebuilding process is uncomfortable because God is not simply changing your circumstances. He is changing your identity. This is why certain habits, mindsets, relationships, and desires no longer fit the person you are becoming. Your spirit has started rejecting environments that once felt normal because God is developing discernment inside you. You cannot keep feeding your soul with confusion and still expect spiritual clarity. You cannot keep entertaining compromise while asking God for greater authority. Rebuilding requires separation from whatever weakens your spirit. And understand this clearly. God is not rebuilding you to become emotionally fragile and dependent on constant encouragement. He is rebuilding you into someone stable, disciplined, spiritually grounded, and internally strong. The next version of you cannot collapse every time criticism appears. It cannot panic every time uncertainty comes. It cannot depend entirely on emotional feelings in order to stay obedient. Real spiritual maturity is built through consistency. It is built when you continue praying even when emotions fluctuate. It is built when you stay disciplined even when motivation disappears. It is built when you remain faithful even when visible results take time. That is the process heaven has been leading you through. Many times you thought you were falling apart, but in reality God was removing the old version of you piece by piece, the insecure version, the fearful version, the distracted version, the version that constantly needed approval, the version that kept doubting its own calling. God cannot fully establish your future while the old identity still controls your thinking. C.S. Lewis once said, "Hardships often prepare ordinary people for an extraordinary destiny." And this is exactly what many of you have failed to recognize. The pressure was preparing capacity, the delays were building endurance, the isolation was strengthening discernment, the battles were teaching spiritual resilience. Nothing was wasted. You were not buried, you were planted. There is a major difference. Burial is the end. Planting is preparation for growth. A seed disappears underground before new life emerges. From the outside it looks hidden, forgotten and surrounded by darkness. But internally, transformation is taking place. Roots are forming, strength is developing, life is preparing to rise. That is exactly where many of you are right now. God has been rebuilding your prayer life, rebuilding your thinking, rebuilding your discipline, rebuilding your spiritual authority, rebuilding your ability to endure pressure without collapsing. And once this rebuilding process reaches maturity, the external results will begin to follow naturally, because lasting transformation always begins internally before it appears externally. God is building something inside you that circumstances alone will no longer be able to destroy. But even as heaven rebuilds your spirit, there is still one dangerous lie that has been trying to stop your progress completely. The most dangerous lie you have been believing is not that God does not exist. It is not even the lie that prayer has no power. The most dangerous lie is far more subtle, far more personal, and far more destructive. It is the quiet belief that you are too broken, too late, too weak, or too unqualified to fully walk in the purpose God placed on your life. That lie has been poisoning your confidence for years. It whispered to you after every disappointment. It grew louder after failures, betrayals, delays, and seasons where nothing seemed to move forward. Slowly, without realizing it, you began agreeing with limitation. You stopped expecting great things from God because deep inside, part of you no longer believed you were worthy of them. You continued surviving externally while internally carrying the belief that your mistakes disqualified you from your future. But hear this clearly today. God has never based your calling on your perfection. If God only used flawless people, nobody in Scripture would have been chosen. Moses doubted himself. Gideon hid in fear. Jeremiah believed he was too young. Peter failed publicly. Paul carried the memory of his past. Yet God still called them, transformed them, and used them powerfully. Why? Because heaven does not choose people based on human perfection. God chooses surrendered hearts willing to obey despite weakness. The enemy wants you trapped in shame because shame keeps people spiritually passive. Shame convinces you to stay hidden. Shame tells you to remain silent. Shame tells you that your past has more authority than God's grace. But that is not the voice of God speaking over your life. The voice of God convicts, but it also restores. The voice of God corrects, but it also rebuilds. The voice of God exposes sin, but it never destroys identity. Many of you have spent years fighting battles that already ended at the cross because you continued carrying guilt that Jesus already paid for. And while you kept condemning yourself, heaven kept calling your name toward purpose. This is why the enemy constantly reminds you of your failures. Because if he can keep your attention trapped in your past, you will never step fully into your future. Some of you are listening right now while secretly believing your opportunity has already passed. You think you wasted too many years. You think you missed your moment. You think your mistakes permanently ruined your destiny. But God is not limited by human timelines. One moment of genuine surrender can restore years of confusion and delay. Heaven knows how to redeem what pain tried to destroy. Se, esse. Lewis once wrote, "Failures are fingerposts on the road to achievement." The enemy wanted your failures to become your identity, but God intended them to become wisdom, humility, and preparation. What nearly broke you emotionally can still become part of the testimony that sets other people free. And this is where many chosen people lose the battle internally, not because they lack gifting, but because they secretly disqualify themselves before obedience even begins. They pray for doors to open while mentally rehearsing reasons they will fail. They ask God for breakthrough while continuing to speak defeat over their own future. You cannot walk in authority while constantly agreeing with hopelessness. You cannot expect transformation while feeding your mind with unbelief every day. You cannot enter a new season while emotionally chained to an old identity. At some point, you must make a decision. Either you continue believing the voice of fear, or you finally believe what God has been speaking over you all along. The enemy calls you disqualified. God calls you chosen. The enemy calls you weak. God says his strength is made perfect in weakness. The enemy reminds you of your past. God speaks about your future. And this is why your mindset matters so deeply. Because the moment your thinking begins to change, your spiritual atmosphere begins changing with it. The moment you stop agreeing with fear, shame, and limitation, something powerful starts awakening inside you again. Hope returns, vision returns, courage returns, expectation returns. And when internal transformation truly begins, everything around you starts shifting in ways you never thought possible. Everything begins changing when your spirit changes first. Most people spend their entire lives trying to fix external circumstances while ignoring the internal condition of their soul. They try to change environments without changing mindset. They try to reach new levels while still carrying old beliefs. They pray for transformation while continuing to think, speak, and live from the same broken identity that kept them trapped before. But God does not transform your life from the outside in. He transforms it from the inside out. That is why true spiritual change is so powerful. The moment your thinking aligns with truth, your direction begins shifting. Your decisions begin shifting. Your relationships begin shifting. Your habits begin shifting. Even the atmosphere around your life starts responding differently because internal transformation changes the way you carry yourself spiritually. Many people underestimate the power of internal agreement. They do not realize that fear, bitterness, hopelessness, insecurity, and constant negativity slowly shape the environment they live in every day. A mind filled with defeat produces defeated actions. A spirit filled with confusion creates unstable direction. But when God renews your thinking, something supernatural begins happening. Your spirit becomes stronger than your circumstances. This is why the enemy fought so hard to keep your mind trapped in discouragement. Because once a chosen person becomes internally aligned with God, external resistance loses much of its power. A focused believer becomes dangerous. A disciplined believer becomes difficult to stop. A spiritually awakened person no longer lives controlled by emotions, fear, or public opinion. Think about the vision in Ezekiel where the dry bones were scattered across the valley. From a natural perspective, everything looked dead, hopeless, and beyond restoration. But when God spoke life into what appeared finished, movement began happening. Bones connected, breath returned, strength emerged. What was once lifeless stood again with power. That is exactly what God is doing inside many of you right now. Some areas of your life felt spiritually dead. Your confidence weakened, your hope faded, your discipline disappeared, your faith became exhausted from disappointment after disappointment. But heaven is breathing life into those dry places again. God is restoring vision where confusion once ruled. He is restoring courage where fear once dominated. He is restoring spiritual hunger where distraction nearly destroyed your focus. And understand this clearly. Transformation is not merely emotional excitement. Real transformation changes behavior. It changes priorities. It changes discipline. It changes what you tolerate, what you pursue, and what you refuse to compromise anymore. When God truly changes you internally, you stop needing constant external validation because your identity becomes rooted in something eternal. This is why some people around you may no longer fully understand you. Your spirit is evolving beyond environments that once kept you comfortable. The conversations that once entertained you now feel empty. The habits that once controlled you begin losing authority. The need to constantly prove yourself slowly dies because your confidence is no longer built on public approval. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Aim at heaven and you will get earth thrown in. Aim at earth and you will get neither." Many people chase temporary things hoping they will finally feel fulfilled, but fulfillment only comes when your life aligns with eternal purpose. The moment your internal priorities shift toward God, everything else begins finding its proper place. And this is the powerful truth. many people never discover. Your external world often reflects the condition of your internal world. When chaos rules the mind, chaos eventually appears in decisions. When fear rules the spirit, opportunities become intimidating. But when peace, discipline, clarity, and faith begin ruling internally, your actions start producing entirely different outcomes. That is why this season is so critical for you. God is not simply trying to improve your circumstances. He is rebuilding your inner life so powerfully that future storms will no longer have the ability to destroy your stability. The old version of you reacted emotionally to everything. The new version of you is learning spiritual authority. You are learning how to stay focused while others panic. You are learning how to remain disciplined while others become distracted. You are learning how to trust God while uncertainty still exists. And as this internal transformation continues, heaven will begin positioning your life differently. New opportunities, new clarity, new strength, and new favor often appear after internal alignment takes place. Because God entrusts greater influence to people whose inner life has been refined by obedience. But transformation alone is not enough. Once God begins changing you internally, you must also learn how to protect that transformation through disciplined action in your daily life. This is the season where you must become extremely protective over your focus. Not every opportunity is from God. Not every voice deserves access to your spirit. Not every relationship is meant to continue into your next chapter. Heaven is calling you into a season of intentional discipline because distraction has already stolen enough time from your destiny. Your first instruction is simple. Return to daily prayer and scripture before you touch the noise of the world each morning. Do not begin your day feeding your mind with fear, negativity, social media, and endless comparison. A distracted mind becomes weak in spiritual warfare, but a mind anchored in God develops clarity, discernment, and strength. Your second instruction is to stop delaying obedience. Many of you already know what God has been telling you to do, but fear has kept you hesitating. Delayed obedience is still disobedience. The longer you wait, the heavier your spirit becomes. There are doors that will only open once you finally move in faith. Your third instruction is to separate from environments that continuously drain your peace, weaken your discipline, and pull you back into confusion. Stop trying to carry people who are committed to staying spiritually asleep. Not everyone is assigned to walk with you into your next season. And finally, build quietly. Stop announcing every vision before it matures. Some things grow stronger in silence. Let discipline speak louder than words. Let consistency speak louder than emotion. Small acts of obedience repeated daily create massive transformation over time. This is not the season to play small, remain distracted, or live emotionally unstable. God is calling you into spiritual maturity. Protect your focus, guard your spirit, stay disciplined, because the next season of your life will be determined by what you choose to obey right now. This is your moment to rise out of confusion, distraction, fear, and spiritual exhaustion. The old season cannot follow you where God is taking you next. Every chain of delay, every mindset of defeat, every voice of hopelessness, and every spirit of distraction must break right here and right now. Heaven has not preserved you this long just for you to remain trapped in cycles that were meant to end seasons ago. You are not forgotten. You are not abandoned. You are not disqualified. God still has purpose attached to your life. Even after the battles, the mistakes, the disappointments, and the silent struggles, heaven is still calling your name forward. The pain did not cancel your assignment. The delays did not destroy your destiny. And the warfare surrounding your life was proof that your future still carries spiritual weight. Today, you must make a decision. No more divided focus. No more emotional surrender to fear. No more agreement with limitation. This is the hour to walk with discipline, clarity, obedience, and spiritual authority. God is calling you to stop surviving and start moving with purpose again. I declare over your life that confusion is breaking. Fear is losing its authority. Strength is returning to your spirit. Clarity is returning to your mind. Discipline is returning to your daily life. The fire you thought had died inside you is being reignited by the power of God. What was delayed will not remain buried forever. What heaven planted inside you will rise again in the right season. You are stepping into a new level of spiritual maturity, a new level of discernment, a new level of confidence rooted not in ego, but in obedience to God. The version of you that constantly doubted, hesitated, and lived in fear is losing power. God is raising up a stronger, wiser, and spiritually grounded version of you through every battle you survived. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Courage, dear heart." Those words matter now more than ever, because courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is obedience in the presence of fear, and heaven is calling you to move forward even while uncertainty still exists. So stand up spiritually, refocus your mind, protect your peace, guard your calling. The next chapter of your life will not be built on distraction but on discipline, not on fear but on faith, not on public approval but on divine purpose. If you receive this word over your life, comment, "I will finish my assignment." Let that declaration become your line of separation from the old season. And if this message spoke directly to your spirit, do not forget to like, subscribe, and share this message with someone who needs encouragement in this hour. You were chosen for such a time as this. Walk forward with boldness. Heaven is not finished with your story.